Hello, adventurer. It's good to see you. You have made it to the morning grind.
Welcome, welcome.
It's the live stream at the beginning of the Geekverse, where we talk about all types of topics in geekdom, gaming, and fantasy, with an emphasis on being constructive and creating the things that we want to exist in the world.
It's all on the grind, Sizemore. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
That's exactly right. There are a lot of adventures to be had today. Dungeons to explore and monsters to slay, and who knows what a random encounter might send our way. That's why we have to prepare. So settle in now for the morning grind with your favorite beverage in hand.
Tea? Or maybe something a little stronger. I've got a few bottles of the old Wynyard left.
Whatever you want. Pull up a chair.
Dude.
If you're feeling fancy, how about a cappuccino? Or a frappuccino? Or how about an espresso?
Just tea, thank you.
Sounds good to me, Gandalf. Whatever you want. I'm just glad you're here.
Everyone is welcome. You can just watch if you want. You don't have to worship anything you don't want to worship.
Thank you, Mike. But be forewarned.
Sometimes we get really strange characters around here.
Wait, what's that you say? Why can't you come and be a part of the stream?
My wife would disown me.
Oh no, I bet she'll be fine with it. Come on in.
Am I scared for my safety? No.
What are we supposed to do?
Everybody do the secret handshake.
Secret cultist handshake.
Oh, now do wizards who love each other.
This, my friend, is a science.
I still don't have gills, but it's fine.
It's all on the grind, son. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
Dude, this would be a sick place to bring the band.
Indeed it would be, Dave. It really would. I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome. Glad to have you here. Oh, look, here's someone new.
Is this the cultist meetup?
Yes it is.
Come to hang out? Please accept me. I have nothing else.
Okay, we accept you. Everyone's welcome here.
Brought some snacks.
Well, that makes things even better.
You want some coffee? I don't drink coffee. You sure? It's cultist coffee. What makes it cultist coffee? I'm a cultist and I'm drinking it. Oh. Then I'll have some.
What exactly is going on here?
I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome, welcome. It's so great to have you. Oh, and look, here comes another stranger.
Can we help you?
Yes, fellow cultists. I could really use some food.
Oh yeah? Welcome. We have donuts.
Oh, it's me. I'm glad I'm here. I'm sure you have a few questions for me, though.
What's your name? Who do you work for? What god do you worship?
Great questions, Rob.
I'm Steve King, and I worship Nyarlathotep.
No, not really. I'm just Heath, and I won't be worshiping anything this morning. But I will be your host. Welcome to the office. We're going to have a great time. I've got my coffee ready, because now it's time for the morning grind.
If you could become a fish, that would be amazing. Then I could command you with my mental fish powers.
Good morning. Good morning. How are we doing? I hope well. Let's see. I'm glad to see everyone here for GURPS Space. Finally, yes. Okay, so there have been, wherever my list is, my office still continues to be an absolute disaster. I'm looking forward to getting some of my getting this miniature project finished over here, because it's just too much to also sit here and try to do everything else at this table at my desk here while also trying to paint an army of miniatures. It's just too much. But my brother, so I'm looking forward to getting at least one round done, but I'm getting closer. Tomorrow night, there'll be no stream because my brother invited me over tomorrow night to play Kings of War. So we put a deadline on our first Kings of War game, 500-point Kings of War game. So I am trying to get my army finished, so 500 points finished at least. So I was working on that. And here is the first regiment that's done. So this is Northman. It's the Starks from A Song of Ice and Fire, but I really like these miniatures. And so last night I finished putting these guys on a base. So that is what a Kings of War foot regiment looks like. I'm pretty proud of it. I think it looks pretty cool. So I'm getting them done here from the rear. Arguably, I put even too much time into the paint job because they end up on this whole the whole base as a regiment. So that's one regiment done. So I'm going to try to glue some of the rest of them on tonight. Trying to decide if we do the live stream tonight. There's a lot of other stuff I've got going on that I just have not been able to get done. So, but no stream tomorrow night because I actually have in-person gaming tomorrow. So we got to do in-person gaming before. But I gotta finish putting those together. Last night, while I did that, I watched. So we're doing GURPS Space because we have the theme of being in environments you're not supposed to be in. I was quasi following the submersible situation that went down by Titanic. I think that was captivating to a lot of people because it was like involves the terror of a whole bunch of different things that we're often terrified by. The dark, the deep water, enclosed spaces, knowing that you're going to die. What do you do in your final moments? Suffocation, potential implosion, starvation, dehydration. I mean, there was a lot there. I think that's probably why. So I watched Red October, and I forgot how much I loved that movie. That I haven't seen that movie in a long, long time, but I was thinking about it because of the Titanic situation, and then also I saw it. It was a game that we had as a kid, and so when I was looking at the NES emulator the other day, I had Hunt for Red October up. I don't really know how great a game that was, but we had Hunt for Red October, and so I watched it a long time ago. It's like, what is this game that we've got? And man, that was a great movie. So I watched Hunt for Red October, and then it was just about time to get into some of these heavier topics again that we needed to get into, or I have had on the list over here. And GURPS Space is one of them, so I figured it continues the theme of being in an environment that you're not supposed to be in. So that was my reasoning here. So good morning, Tomocrat. Good morning, James. And Sable Phoenix. Hey, Robert. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Yes, this one is lots of great reference material. James says, I've loved everything we reviewed for GURPS so far. I'm eventually going to have to grab World War II book as well, see how that plays. These are great resource material. They are. Oh, thank you. Make it an off-site dinner and a board game. I don't have the equipment to make it an off-site dinner, but that would be fun. That would be fun. But also, I don't think my brother wants to be on camera. So, and I was thinking, I was making a brief video, kind of like a video blog or something like that about creating the Kings of War army. I did one entry in it. And so as I've been painting, I was taking other just very quick and casual discussions of what I was doing in order to get this army up and running. And so I could do that again, but also I don't know if I want to interrupt our games. So tomorrow's going to be like just a test game. We did it. We did kind of a test game to learn the rules the other day, just with a couple of units trying to figure out what it was. So we will see. Good morning, Vision. James says it's a tragic situation for sure, but it all seems most the fault that can be pinned on that one guy. Yeah, I know it does not seem like it was planned. I mean, that I was thinking, gee, if I were going to go on for like that, like how would you plan that? And it seems like I would want triple redundancy on everything, including the emergency beacon. I think the kind of dead man switch that has the dissolving, like the dissolving parts to release the ballast in 16 hours. So you're coming up in 16 hours, but you still got to be found. Sable Phoenix says The Hunt for Red October is an utterly fantastic film. Great book too. I have not read the book. We may have to. That seems like one maybe to add to Table Talk one night. I would never say that Alec Baldwin is a better actor than Harrison Ford, but for the role of Jack Ryan, he was a much better casting choice. Hey, good morning, Rogue Thinker. Good to see you. Good to see you. Jack Ryan is, in his own words, just an analyst. Yeah. Oh, I did love that too. Yes. Also, The Hunt for Red October has the single best transition from subtitled dialogue to spoken English dialogue in any film ever. Yes. Good morning, Anon. Like a convenience store, I'm not even supposed to be here. Oh, Stray's here too. All right, we got lots of people coming in now. Oh, I remember that one too. Yeah. The Northman and the 13th Warrior. It's been a long time since I've seen the 13th Warrior too. Wow. TSL Frontman says some military books have made for phenomenal narrative inspiration: Spec Ops, Extraction, Assassination, Squad-based combat, objectives, etc. All right, let's come over here to our book. So there is a lot in this book. So this will probably be a multi-day dive, because I think this is one of the most, as I remember it, this is one of the crunchiest books, like RPG books, that I've ever written. Or read. The future is yours. Now updated for GURPS 4th edition. This is the ultimate toolkit for any campaign between the stars. Explore options for space travel and technology, from the realistic to the miraculous. Design alien races and monsters. Create campaigns of every style, from science fantasy to space opera to near future realism. Build worlds from asteroids to Dyson spheres. With this book, you can create anything from a single alien beast to a whole galaxy of civilizations and star systems quickly and randomly, or with detailed step-by-step processes that's true to biology and astrophysics as we understand them today. Whether you're creating a single alien or an entire race, a single planet, or a dozen systems, GURPS Space gives you the information you need. Based on modern astrophysical knowledge, you can build a setting as hard science as you want, or just choose details that work for your story and skip the rocket science. GURPS Space is written by two experienced authors, John Ziegler, author of Traveler, Interstellar Wars, and GURPS Traveler First In, and James Cambius, author of GURPS Mars and GURPS Planet of Adventure. So here we are. Is that like... Oh, so that wasn't quite the rear of the book, but that was basically our intro and what this book is supposed to do. All right. Do I have a physical copy of this? I do. Master and Commander is a great series of books that was made into one great film. I know. I missed watching Master and Commander when it came out, but I watched that a few years ago. That was fantastic. I thought that Master and Commander was great. I wish that was like the last of our great historic epics. I was reading something about that Master and Commander was one of the last historic epic films during that era, because we don't really get a whole lot of those anymore. And that one didn't do it. That was supposed to be launching a franchise, and it didn't. And it's like Star Trek, except for it's actually on a naval vessel. I thought it was great. I wish that it would have been able to continue and create that franchise. Traveler character, people are pro Traveler. Traveler character generation is one of my favorite character gen methods of all time. Okay, so do we have an introduction here? I think we understand what we're doing here. So space. A little literary history. Oh, what is not in this book? Okay, what's not in this book? Though GURPS Space is intended as the chief source book for science fiction role playing using the GURPS system, the main focus of this book is adventures in space and on other worlds. There are whole subgenres of science fiction that aren't covered here because they're important enough to get their own source books. Descriptions of specific game universes are covered in GURPS world books. GURPS Infinite Worlds covers time travel, interdimensional travel, and alternate histories, and presents a campaign framework that links all the GURPS world books. GURPS Powers describes psionics and other superpowers. Forthcoming tech books will provide shopping lists of futuristic gadgets. There is a GURPS Ultra Tech. So there's low tech, high tech, and ultra tech books. So this is not going to have a whole bunch of ultra tech gear. I suppose the GURPS Space, this is also a good one to do right now because we got aliens and UFOs more than aliens. We got I haven't actually heard much out of that lately, but because I suppose because the submersible has taken a lot of the time and energy. I lost my mouse. There we go. Grush, I think his last name's Grush. We almost talked about him on the last members only stream. But we got plenty of UFOs around here right now too. GURPS, James says, man, I swear GURPS feels like I can do anything. I half expect there to be a GURPS Parisian School of Cooking source book. GURPS curing and tanning animal skins. Now, GURPS, that's probably in low tech. I bet we can come up with some rules for curing and tanning animal skins. Good morning, Andrew. Good morning. All right. Hard and soft science fiction. Let's see what they say about right here. In discussion of science fiction, hard science fiction refers to stories in which science is as accurate as possible and usually the focus of the story as well. Soft sci-fi has shifted slightly in meaning over the years. Originally, it referred to stories focusing on the soft sciences, psychology, sociology, history, etc. Those are the sciences concerned with human behavior, and in time, soft sci-fi began to refer to stories that de-emphasize the science in favor of getting closer to the characters and their emotions. What started simply as a matter of classification turned into a minefield when some fans and authors tried to insist that only hard science fiction was real science fiction, and that any stories that subordinated the science to the characters were somehow inferior or pretentiously imitating mainstream fiction. In an interesting boomerang effect, many critics outside the field have taken much the same line, insisting that all science fiction is just about gadgets, and any stories that portray human emotions and relationships aren't science fiction because they are too good for the field. In this book, we're going to avoid any judgments about what sorts of fiction is best. Hard science fiction refers to stories with a strong emphasis on scientific accuracy, while soft science fiction here means stories and campaigns that do not. What is best depends on what the players and GM do. One might expect the least realistic form of science fiction to be what is often called science fantasy, in which scientific and magical elements are blended. Examples include Heinlein's story Waldo and Christopher Staff's Warlock series. Starships Warlock series. But in point of fact, science fantasy can have its own varying degrees of realism. If the magic is tightly defined and the interactions between magic and science are carefully thought out, then it can be just as realistic as any moderately hard science fiction with one or two bits of imaginary science. The magic just fills the niche of rubber science. A great example of a highly realistic science fantasy is the GURPS Technomancer setting, which blends techno-thriller technology with rigorously explored magic and addresses the social and political implications of industrial-scale magic in a scientific and rational way. By contrast, most superhero settings include both magic and super science and treat neither one with much realism at all. Wizards, sentient machines, aliens, avatars, and powerful gods and mutants with strange powers all coexist. Yet the society in which they operate shows no effect at all. Nothing is realistic. It's all about a lot of fun and allows cool adventures in capes and spandex. Most game masters can certainly combine fantasy and science fiction in GURPS space as well, treat the magic as just another area of rubber science, and set the realism level as needed for the desired level of campaign. Obviously, a full discussion of fantasy is beyond the scope of this book, but GURPS Fantasy and other source books can supply the missing ingredients. Good morning, Neutromancer. Designing a space campaign. Scope and interstellar travel. It's not like I don't have enough worlds to build, but I think that it would be a fun setting or world, or I guess you would call it setting, but or whatever, universe to build, where humanity is under attack, but we're basically defending the solar system. So we have a little bit of ability to go places, but basically just operate within our solar system. So we're defending Earth, but the battlefield is like our solar system. And then I would use a bunch of like World War II kind of analogies for the ships so that you can be out of communication and things like that as you're trying to defend the solar system from incoming aliens. LOL, rubber science. You get hard science fiction, soft science fiction, and rubber science fiction. Yes. Rogue Thinker says, once again, I suggest Quetzal by Alan Dean Foster about a group of space bunnies that come to Earth. Wait, we have that exact scenario would be what we got with Space Above and Beyond. Oh, I don't know that one. I'll have to look that one up. Is that a TV show? Oh, yeah, it's a science fiction TV show. Huh. I'll check that out. Yet, ranked as IGN's top 50 science fiction TV shows, it was described as yet another sci-fi show that went before its time. Huh. Or at least it's only one season, so we can get into them. Let's see. Ships and outposts. Some of these, I guess these call-outs over here are fun. General technology, aliens and other non-humans. But ships and outposts, a common and very useful situation in science fiction is to chronicle the adventures of a daring spaceship crew as they voyage through the galaxy. Undoubtedly, Star Trek's USS Enterprise is the most famous example, but there are scores of others. All of them can trace their ancestry back to sea stories, from the Horatio Hornblower novels clear back to the Odyssey or the story of Jason and the Argonauts. A tremendous strength of the ship-based dramatic framework is its flexibility. The characters are in a familiar setting, but that setting is mobile, letting them interact with new antagonists and encounter new situations. This applies to role-playing campaigns as well as fiction. The ship itself becomes a natural home base for the characters. Players may get quite attached to their in-game starship, drawing up deck plans, pouring through ship design rules, and upgrades to drool over, or designing insignia. Now, there is also GURPS spaceships. There's a whole nother book that's dedicated specifically to spaceship design. I keep hearing about Expanse. Yes, I got to look at that one too. People tell me that one's really good. James says, the Expanse started out extremely strong with hard science fiction, and then it went softened. I began to lose interest. I do need to look at that. There's so many things I need to watch. Too many things to watch, too many things to play. So this applies. Okay, so players may get quite attached there, yes, but since the ship moves around, the GM can easily introduce new characters to new adventures. The relative cost of a spacecraft is important. If only governments can afford them, the setting will have a very different feel than if a group of startup entrepreneurs can get a used ship and start trading. Probably the most important bit of preparation for any ship-based campaign is to create the starship itself. If one or more of the players have a gearhead bent and interesting in delving into technical minutia, this may be a good idea to let them do the design work. within the limits of budgetary and technological restrictions imposed by the game master, and possibly the campaign setting. The ship they create can be a great guide for the GM in creating adventures. Players who stuff their ships with weapons obviously want to be able to point those weapons at something. Let them chase space pirates or fight off an alien invasion. If they pack a sensor suite and planetary survey instruments and give the ship enough onboard fuel purifiers and repair shops to keep it running for years away from civilization, they're probably going to want to explore the great beyond. A variant campaign idea is the outpost or space station. Like a ship, an outpost framework provides a cozy home base for the characters. Unlike ships, outposts are stationary. Adventure has to come to them. Important outposts in sci-fi include the titular space stations of Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine television series, and the giant space hospital of James White's Sector General stories. Outpost campaigns have many of the same concerns as those built around a starship. Typically, a station is larger and more self-sufficient than a ship, but this just means its enemies get to be more powerful. Visitors to the outpost are obviously the obvious adventure hooks, but occasionally the crew does go off on missions within the station's area of responsibility. Because of the more static nature of the outpost campaigns, adventures are likely to be less action-oriented and involve more role-playing and politicking. Neutromancer says, I just came to the conclusion that the hard-soft realism regarding technology misses the point. The important distinction to me should be exploring how it affects society rather than being possible. Well, that's what it was saying. That was kind of the original purpose of being soft sci-fi, or the original meaning of soft sci-fi, it said. That this is more about societal exploration than it is about the realism of the science. Scale and scope, tone. Oh, we got lots of different things on tone. Escalating scale. The tone is the feel of the campaign, the mood the GM wants to invoke in the setting. There's a vast range of possible tones. To some extent, every author and every story or film has a slightly different one. In classic science fiction, however, several tones predominate. So action adventure, horror, romance, space opera. Sometimes considered a subgenre of its own, space opera is sci-fi with all the dials cranked up to 11. The scale is titanic. Seldom are characters concerned with the fate of anything less than a whole planet. The range is usually vast. Psychological realism takes a backseat to battles of ultimate good against blackest evil. Scientific realism is back there too, cowering helplessly as physical laws are broken with contemptuous ease. Spaceships are huge and baroque, doing battle with brightly colored beam weapons. Aliens are many and exotic. Settings emphasize wonder, see below, and plots emphasize action, see above. Thrillers emphasize suspense. Surreal sci-fi questions our very notions of reality. If computer-generated virtual reality can simulate the virtual world, how do we know which one is real? And then wonder, we got, travelogue. One of the oldest of the sci-fi story, the travelogue subordinates characters and actions to descriptions of exotic settings. Skilled writers like Jules Verne and Jack Vance have made the Fantastic Voyage a mainstay of the genre. Wonder. The sense of wonder is one of the most characteristic emotions invoked by sci-fi. Because of such a standard part of sci-fi, wonder should turn up in just about every campaign. Escalating the scale, campaign types. So let's see what realism says here. Strange new worlds. Space opera, a subgenre that was arguably started by the Lensman series. All right, see about realism. Realism has two meanings in a GURPS-based game. The first is the level of physical realism, how hard the science is and how plausible the technology. The second is the social or psychological realism, how realistically people behave. Scientific realism, surprisingly, is not the ultimate goal of every science fiction campaign. Certain sci-fi literature... Wait, hold on. Let me check something. Okay. I don't know that one. Good morning, Jonathan. So, certain science fiction literature has plenty of rubber science in its science fiction films. It's a noteworthy event if they get the science right. Internal consistency is more important than strict accuracy. Game masters are free to set the level of scientific realism at whatever level supports the game they wish to run. Different levels have different advantages and disadvantages. Strict adherence to hard science gives the campaign the advantage of plausibility. It makes the suspension of disbelief easy. The obvious disadvantage is there's lots of things that are impossible in the real world, but are nevertheless a big part of sci-fi, such as faster than light travel. A setup from a pure hard science is mostly hard sci-fi, which allows one or two bits of imaginary science, like faster than light drives, but rigorously works all of the implications of and effects of the world. More removed from realism is hand-waving science fiction, best exemplified by television and film. We're assured that all of this is science rather than magic, but the exact mechanisms are never explained, and capabilities are devised on the basis of plot demands rather than strict science. There's usually a reasonable amount of internal consistency, but it's much more fictional consistency. At the far end of the realism scale is purely cinematic reality. Spaceships look cool and make impressive whooshing noise in deep space. People carry hand weapons like energy swords or plasma-firing crossbows, and never mind how they work. In contrast with scientific realism, social realism determines how realistically the characters in the setting behave. Wasn't Neutromancer just talking about that? Social realism determines how, it can be called the rigor of the game world. In realistic settings, all actions have consequences. Villains are not motivated simply by villainy, and people think their actions through. Somewhat less realistic is the tone adopted by most films. For the sake of narrative convenience, the heroes don't suffer consequences as long as they win and their actions are done for a good cause. Shooting up the mall is okay as long as no innocents got hurt and the bad guys needed shooting. Least realistic is what one might call mythic science fiction, which adopts an almost fairy tale attitude of absolute good and evil. Consequences are not bad on reason, but on karma or cosmic justice. Think of social and scientific realism as the different axes on a graph. Stories can be very realistic in one sense and completely unrealistic in another. Much early sci-fi strove for solid, hard science realism, but then used characters and plots of fairy tale simplicity. Much of the new wave of the 1960s and 70s took the opposite approach, using psychological realism and completely imaginary science. Both set realism levels to support the kinds of adventures the players want. High science fiction and moderate social realism for Indiana Jones-style exploits on a near-future Mars mission. Low science and high social realism for gritty political drama in the Galactic Empire. Outer space swashbuckling adventure gets a low setting for both, and so on. Oh, alien archaeology. Let's see about that. Hey, Chase and PH. Good morning. Good morning. Alien archaeology. Whole civilizations could be born, spread across the galaxy, and finally go extinct before humans ever venture off Earth. Alien archaeology offers the scientific puzzle of figuring out alien civilization from potsherds and inscriptions, and Indiana Jones' thrills of evading traps and defenses in tombs and temples, and the classic RPG experience of exploring vast underground complexes full of dangers and treasure. If the ancient aliens were more advanced than humans, then these ruins are particular treasure troves of ultra-tech items, which is likely to attract rival archaeologists, looters, and sinister government agents. You know, you could even do something like this on Earth. This sounds like ancient aliens, or, you know, the ancient civilization hypothesis here on Earth. I've seen some people talk about, what are these UFOs going around all over the place. Maybe they're AI controlled drones, basically, from an ancient civilization that's here on Earth that has long since gone extinct, but its technology is kept working. Like maybe these are like surveillance crafts or something like that that is kept working. Maybe there's even automated repair stations under the ocean or someplace. So you could do something like that here on Earth. Oh, that would actually be a really cool game. Set it kind of modern. I wonder if you could integrate that into something like the Black Cipher. But you could do something like, let's do it modern day campaigns, a science fiction campaign, but basically start out modern day or in a few years, and then say that we found the remnants of an alien civilization, or early, it could be earlier human civilization, I don't know, some advanced race here on Earth that's the source of these UFOs. And so you're doing basically an alien archaeology campaign on Earth. That would be cool. Or a mothership, the Bermuda Triangle, or a mothership that lies at the bottom of the Bermuda Triangle. That would be pretty cool too. We found the mothership and it's quasi-functional at the bottom of the Bermuda Triangle. That would be cool. So if the ancient aliens were more advanced than humans, then the ruins are potentially a treasure trove of ultra-tech items, which is likely to attract rival archaeologists, looters, and sinister government agents. Finding out what made the aliens go extinct can add some urgency to the pure science, especially if it turns out to be still lurking around someplace. And there's always the chance that some of the ancient aliens aren't extinct. We just don't see them right now. This can be good or bad depending on how powerful aliens are and what they want. H. Beam Piper's classic story Omnilingual involves space archaeology, as do more recent works like Alastair Reynolds' Revelation Space. Big dumb objects. Let's see what this is, James. Oh, thank you for the Discord link, Stray. Did we breathe and sip? Let's breathe and sip. I think I got talking about miniatures and things like that this morning. So here we go. Stargate is an example of that. Sounds like a good side quest to do ruin runs for special artifacts. Yes, could be. Let's do breathe and sip here. 2 deep breaths, complete inhales, complete exhales, and then let's take a sip of our favorite beverage. All right, let's see what big dumb objects are. One type of alien environment often seen in recent science fiction is the giant artificial habitat, inspired by the theoretical speculations of scientists like Freeman Dyson and Gerald K. O'Neill. Writers began imagining bigger and bigger artificial worlds. From Arthur C. Clarke's giant starship Rama to Larry Niven's Ring World, they became progressively vaster. Book reviewers and critics coined the term big dumb object to describe stories about exploring them. Usually the huge habitat is abandoned or its inhabitants have regressed to barbarism. Otherwise, there is no mystery and the heroes are likely to be outclassed by their technology. Sometimes, as with Rama, there are automatic systems still working. One interesting variant is the living sentient space habitat described in John Varley and his Titan series. It's a big smart object and turns out to be a big crazy object as well. Big dumb objects are a great source of the sense of wonder so important to science fiction, and their tremendous size allows for a wide variety of inhabitants, cultures, and adventures. A whole campaign could be set on a single object as the heroes wander about seeking clues for the origin and purpose of it or looking for a way home. Space colonists, survivors, and refugees. Mercenaries, planetary romance. Many great science fiction military stories involve the exploits of mercenaries, professional soldiers selling their services to powerful governments, to various governments and corporations to fight wars on distant worlds. Mercenaries don't earn any money when they aren't fighting, so there's plenty of action. Often their employers can't afford overwhelming force to throw against the foe, so the heroes face difficult challenges. They may get to operate in a wide variety of settings and environments. Mercenary campaigns tend to be very episodic. The heroes get hired, do the job, and then go on to the next contract. It's hard to build up any kind of ongoing meta plot under these circumstances. If the enemy are more numerous than we thought or surprisingly well equipped, too often the players will start to suspect the GM is stacking the deck. Mercs may get suckered into illegal or covert operations where betrayal is part of the mission. Planetary romance is a very durable subtype of science fiction that focuses on a single world, especially a large Earth-like planet or big dumb object, with lots of exotic alien cultures on it. Notable examples include Edgar Rice Burroughs' Martian novels, L. Sprague de Camp's Katrina stories, Jack Vance's Taisha novels, and Lee Brackett's Scathe series. Planetary romance typically involves a low-technology setting to allow swordplay, pirate ships, gladiatorial battles, and similar swashbuckling. The emphasis is not on the biology or sociology of the alien planet, but rather on perils and adventure. This planet has human or nearly human inhabitants, so allows for beautiful maidens in need of rescue. Running a planetary romance campaign is relatively simple. Just drop the heroes into an exotic world and then throw bandits and pirates and beautiful maidens and lost treasure at them while searching for a way to get home. It does require substantial preparation, as the world has to be worked out in some detail before the heroes arrive. That seems like your typical fantasy game, except for making it sci-fi instead. James says, GURPS, winning my dollars yet again. I just went out and bought this book. Yeah. V'ger as a big dumb object. Oh, PH says, Heath, I was thinking the other day what you said. I was thinking about what you said yesterday on figuring out how to use a class or skill for a maiden or something like that. How about using a sort of kit from AD&D 2nd Edition, a kit not tied to class? Maybe that could work too. I'm going to have to sit and work. I've got to work with Pathfinder quite a bit more to figure out what's in there. And like, hey, because I think the best way to do that is to build those classes within the existing classes, especially for the world primer. And that way, you're not necessarily breaking anything. That way, you're not breaking anything. We're trying to add in new classes. So a kit, a couple of extra feats or something like that to an existing class, I think is going to be the way to go. Oh yeah, big dumb objects would be like ring worlds, Dyson spheres, etc. Relic from Star Trek: The Next Generation. Yep. A kit is like a profession, background, prestige class, some kind of template you add to a character independent of its class, something that gives you new narrative and game mechanics. I agree. Yeah. Pathfinder uses background templates that may work. Yes. We'll get back to that probably next week. Maybe I'll come up with some kind of solution by then. Starship Troopers. Okay, so actually, we're looking at all these. Okay, let's look at this, because this is giving us an example or a rundown of things for different types of campaigns. So let's do a military campaign. It's probably no surprise that the most popular science fiction franchise ever was called Star Wars. Military-oriented science fiction makes up a large chunk of the genre today and shows no sign of slowing. Starship Troopers. Characters in a military campaign might be infantry, battlesuit troopers, mechanized troops, tanks, aircraft, mecha, etc., or the crew of a warship or space station. They may be employed by a government, or they may work for mercenary organizations. Character roles. Characters should be part of the same organization and usually the same unit. They should have the skills within their group to perform their unit's duties. They might be on the fighting end, in which case they will probably be enlisted men or junior officers, or they might be in command, senior officers with staff officers with commands of their own. Things to do. In wartime, Marines would be bug hunting on in their battle suits, while spacers are repelling boarding parties on their starships. Fighter pilots will scramble when they are given the signal, and officers will make life and death decisions. If the campaign is on the frontier or stellar government is weak, fighting can continue in peacetime, especially for mercenaries. Campaign adventures. Government troops don't have to buy their own equipment. Since the PCs must answer to a higher command, the GM can more easily direct the campaign. Campaign disadvantages. Military PCs have a duty to their organization and its officers. Military regulations might be enforced. Unless the PCs include the captain of a crucial ship or star base, or the elite squad that always performs the critical assault, their individual actions will seldom influence the entire battles or wars. If the GM isn't careful, all the battles may start to feel the same. And then each one of these actually has a whole bunch of references too. So this would be stuff to get into, which I don't know. So, okay, well, Starship Troopers is here. But so these I don't. References Lois McAllister's, Bujold's, Miles Vorkogesian. Jizgen? I don't know these. Fated Sun, Hammers Slammers, The Forever War, Starship Troopers, Space Viking, Cobra, and Black Collar. Ace Pilots. The Big Chair. So Ace Pilots, that's is talking about the Star Wars films. The PCs can have super hot fighting machines without being multi-billionaires. So characters, the pilot campaigns usually center on a single squadron, either stationed at a base or flying off in a carrier. Whereas the Big Chair, the exploits of a heroic starship captains have a respectable history for science fiction dating back to well before Star Trek's Captain Kirk became an icon of the whole genre. The Big Chair. So what does it list then? References the Star Trek film series and novels, David Weber's Honor Harrington novels, David Drake's Lieutenant Leary RCN series. I was appreciating, like, when I was thinking about hard science fiction last night as I was watching Hunt for Red October. I like it when, like, the starships are more like submarines. They're like capital ships, but have also the strong submarine element, because also this element of being in an environment you're really not supposed to be in is so neat. But I was paying careful attention to the command centers, the bridges of both the U.S. and the Russian ships, the submarines. So the Marines. Space navies can only control space. It still takes soldiers to conquer a planet, the Space Marines. Marines are assault troops, the ground arm of the Navy. Their most dangerous job comes in wartime, boarding enemy vessels, if technology permits, and securing beachheads on hostile worlds. Marine contingents are assigned to all warships as security forces. During peacetime, Marines conduct war games, guard naval bases, train planetary militias, and perform police action, commando raids against pirates and criminal bases in cooperation with the Space Patrol. In repressive societies, they also crush unrest and rebellion. The toughest of the tough, Marines live up to their reputation in combat and off-duty. They get the dirty jobs, and that's the way they like it. It isn't smart to mess with Marines. Adventuring possibilities. The most likely place to encounter Marines outside of battle is in a starport town on leave. Former Marines make well-prepared adventurers and may know secrets from their military days. I would like to have seen Montana. Jonathan Reese says, I would love to see a movie actually based on Highland's Starship Troopers, unlike the Starship Troopers we actually got. Yeah, Tomocrat says Starship Troopers would be a good movie to review with all of its propaganda tones. That would also be a good book to review, to actually, because I don't know that. I understand that the movie went off in a different direction. Chase says, GURPS has been my go-to game for science fiction since first edition came out. It does the genre better than any other game I've tried, and there have been a lot. Jonathan says, GURPS really almost beats everything once you get to gunpowder. The cast of that movie was also just fantastic. I mean, so many people were in that movie, the Hunt for Red October. We had a question about how Savage Worlds does science fiction. Jonathan Reese says, as usual, when comparing Savage Worlds to GURPS, it more depends on how you feel about the two systems in the specific genre, I think. Well, it can be. GURPS always based as much as possible on reality, but you can get away from it pretty easily because it's talking about doing rubber science here and what happens with supers. I got supers over here. Do I have? I just want to be sure. Oh, yes. Actually, I screwed up here because I do have space, but it's the soft cover. I need the hard cover. I've got Powers. Powers is a fantastic GURPS book. It is also extremely crunchy, but it's about basically how to design any type of power for your game. But that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be realistic. But if you're doing any type of I don't know, comic book superhero. The Rangers. The Rangers, or Star Rangers, are a paramilitary force trained in survival, rescue, and combat on hazardous or untamed planets. They are practical outdoorsmen and survival experts. Rangers may also act as marshals on new colonies, keeping law and order until the society becomes self-governing. They are often called upon to guard or rescue scout expeditions and sometimes to join space patrol missions. There's a grudging mutual respect between the tough, freewheeling Rangers and the spit and polish patrolmen. In some settings, the Ranger service may be an arm of the patrol. Adventuring possibilities. On the frontier, Rangers are the only law enforcers. PCs may find themselves deputized by the local Ranger in an emergency. Ranger PCs can be a lot of fun if the campaign sticks to the Ranger's assigned territory and an all-Ranger campaign is possible. Stop in the name of the law. Space patrol campaigns. For a different sort of military campaign, the players can run characters who are fighting a war of rebellion against a presumably tyrannical regime. The most famous rebels in science fiction are the Rebel Alliance of Star Wars, but there are many others, often based on patriots of the American Revolution or the resistance during World War II. Rebellion campaigns offer considerably more resistance and independence of action than a conventional military campaign. Rebels seldom have a very tight chain of command and can't be sticklers for discipline and regulations. A rebellion campaign also has a nice progression in scale. As the heroes score more victories, the rebel side grows in power and battles can be for higher stakes. Heroes can start out fighting to survive and then take down some smaller isolated government outposts, graduate to major offensives, and finally take the war of the tyrant stronghold itself. The biggest problem faced by rebel characters is supplies. Unless there's a friendly government beyond the border furnishing ships and ammunition, the rebels must steal what they need and carefully hoard what they have. The Moon is a harsh mistress. Later seasons of Babylon 5. Bounty Hunters. No disintegrations. If the players don't enjoy the regimentation and rigidity of running Space Patrol characters but still want to chase galactic bad guys, they can be bounty hunters, freelance law enforcement agents tracking bad guys for money. Mike Resnick chronicled the exploits of space bounty hunters for his novel Santiago, as well as the Widowmaker series. For the GM, a bounty hunter campaign has much to recommend it. The heroes don't have a vast organization to help them, but they are ultimately on the side of law and order. Bounty hunters are often perfect adventure hooks, and fugitive crooks can lead their hunters into all sorts of exotic worlds and bizarre situations. There's a satisfying action level, but bounty hunters who bring in smoldering piles of ash too often will suffer consequences. I'm sure it would talk about The Mandalorian. See you later, Chase. I don't know. See, I don't know GURPS Traveler. Space pirates. In science fiction, space pirates are a venerable tradition dating back to the pulp era. Unless players like to run characters who are greedy psychopaths, a space pirate campaign should probably make use of the romantic rogue of heart and gold image familiar from swashbuckling fiction. The pirates only rob ships belonging to bad guys, the galactic tyrant, the evil corporation, or the nasty aliens. Space piracy is usually restricted to highly cinematic space opera campaigns. But if everyone can agree to suspend their disbelief, space pirate adventures can be used all the brightly colored trappings of pirate fiction. Buried treasures, revenge, duels, rescues, walking the plank out of the airlock, and lots of swinging around on ropes. To give it the real Errol Flynn feel, make energy swords or vibro blades the weapon of choice and limit the plasma cannons to point-blank range. When piracy, military campaigns, and trading meets its privateer campaign, in which the adventurers are not part of a military force, but has been given a license, traditionally known as a letter of marque, to attack enemy shipping. Essentially, they are allowed to act like pirates as long as they confine their piracy to a specific enemy. They can use friendly ports quite openly, and sometimes even get some help from regular military forces. However, they have to be careful about choosing legal targets, and their license only lasts as long as the war. Privateers are basically self-employed mercenaries, so a privateer adventurers could be working in an ongoing mercenary campaign as well. The pen is mightier than the blaster? With the computer revolution of the 1980s and the birth of the information age, the power of media and the importance of how information is presented became a major theme in science fiction. Cyberpunk fiction is all about the information in virtual reality, and even the most rivet-studded hard science fiction must now at least acknowledge the importance of information networks. The Traveler role-playing game uses the Traveler News Service as a way to disseminate adventure hooks, red herrings, and information about the setting. Agents of Terra. Heroic bureaucrats, working stiffs. Heroic engineering. GURPS Traveler's outstanding. Cowboy Bebop. Oh, Jonathan says, "Oh, we have I think we had this discussion about it at one point, saying that it was actually better than one edition of Traveler, like you're talking about here, Jonathan. I think Traveler basically does everything that Traveler does, only better. GURPS Traveler does everything that Traveler does, only better. More solid skill system, better combat, solid world building, etc." PH says, "I loved Supers. I made 80 characters that never saw a session in their fake lives. I was amazed by the book, especially because it was all based on reality." Supers isn't one that I have. I've never really been all that interested in playing like a Supers campaign. Oh, Neutromancer says there's a sale on a bunch of Free League products right now. Heroic engineering. Okay, science fiction is defined as stories about or involving science and technology, so it's natural that a very old subgenre concentrates on stories about people engaged in large technology projects. This was once a central part of science fiction, but was gradually shoved aside by more adventure-oriented fiction. But it never died out completely. Stories of heroic engineering included Arthur C. Clarke's The Fountains of Paradise, about the construction of a space elevator, and parts of Kim Stanley Robinson's Green Mars series about terraforming Mars. In heroic engineering stories, the actual process of doing the job and overcoming the technological challenges are major themes, rather than just the background for drama. In a GURPS space adventure, heroic engineering can be an interesting alternative to blaster fights and space marketing. Tasks like designing a new starship or completing a space colony can be quite fascinating, even if they don't involve much adrenaline. Engineering adventures do require players who are interested in coming up with their own equipment designs, using the new rules for new inventions or gadgeteering. The game master can complicate matters with hidden flaws, industrial spies among the labor crew, sinister forces intent on stopping the project. That's like in Contact. I need to watch Contact again. Contact, when there was the terrorists who were trying to blow up the thing to contact the aliens. Those problems can generate blaster fights and hover chases, and even keeping the non-engineer characters busy. However, it may be necessary for the game master and some players to do the actual design evaluation and skill rolls, either via email rather than during game sessions. Otherwise, players may easily get bored. Construction. You don't get much more blue-collar than construction work, even if it's 1,000 miles up in orbit. All of those orbital stations, starships, space colonies, and whatnot don't build themselves, unless it's a game setting with advanced biotech and living spaceships, of course. The crews who do the work of building them can get into all kinds of interesting trouble. As with prospecting, the entire work may itself be only a backdrop. The real fun comes when the workers face labor rackets or corporate thugs, or when colonies they are working suddenly declare itself independent and get into a shooting war, or when it turns out that someone on the shift is part of a smuggling ring. If the project includes asteroid mining for raw materials, The work crews may spend part of their time as prospectors, which adds to the adventuring possibility. Well, who needs a starship? While flying from world to world aboard a sleek starship is the most common image in science fiction, sometimes others use different means of traveling from planet to planet. Robert Heinlein's Tunnel in the Sky shows explorers adventuring to other worlds through teleport gates. Dan Simmons' Hyperion series makes it even easier. People can have houses with rooms on different planets. The Stargate film and television series used a similar idea. Getting rid of spaceships makes the setting much more convenient for heroes who aren't rich enough to afford their own ship or to buy passage frequently. This doesn't completely eliminate the need for brave pilots, since many settings require someone to go out and find places to put gates. The Heinlein novel avoids this by letting the gate projectors probe out for new locations, and Stargate assumes a pre-existing network. Interstellar gates are quick and easy to use. How expensive they are depends on how much energy they consume and how hard they are to build. If the cost is low, then every place in the galaxy is next door, and civilizations will function as a single giant city. A high cost limits private trade and travel, but military forces can still deploy instantly to meet threats. Oh, so let's talk about aliens. I've never heard of that one either. Jonathan Reese says it's almost always a problem trying to do Robin and Superman in the same team. I've only found games like Capes that handle it. So far, Phase Rip does it decently, but it's hard. I hadn't thought about that. People talk about, hey, can you actually do an elf and a hobbit in the same game? I think you can. We're talking about if we add like Tolkien elves and hobbits. I think you can. But I suppose if you're in the super genre, then something like Robin and Superman, are trying to put them both in the same campaign would be the equivalent. All right, how do we deal with aliens? This is still the prep to getting into this. Space travel, because we haven't even gotten into actually computing how to travel between planets. Nothing affects the flavor of science fiction setting as much as the presence or absence of alien races. There can be one alien species in a campaign, a handful, or a great many, and their roles can range between from subjugated to overlords. Chapter 6 contains detailed rules for creating alien beings. Alone in the cosmos, so you're alone, but the Galactic Club, there are only a handful of starfaring alien forms. Almost everyone will recognize each type of alien and know the important facts about it. This arrangement has the advantage the GM can develop each alien species in some depth, and the players won't have any trouble remembering which is which. Larry Niven's Known Space series has only about 10 alien species. On the other hand, we could have aliens everywhere. And if we're going aliens everywhere, we can have dominant. One more species may dominate the others. Their power may be military, conquerors, or peacekeepers, or economic. Common. A race that's older, faster breeding, or aggressive in exploration may be encountered often. The opposite is rare. Such races may be new to interstellar civilizations. Exotic. Races may be well known because they have odd customs, bizarre reputations, unusual biology, or control of a particular technology. In Doctor Who, the Time Lords are known throughout the galaxy for their mastery of time, even though they seldom leave their citadel. Advanced. Some races might have higher tech levels than the others in the campaign. Like in the Babylon 5 television series, the Vorlons are known to be vastly more advanced than the other civilizations. Precursor, subrace, descendant, unknown. Society, the Federation. The corporate state, the Empire. Interstellar organizations, government organizations, diplomatic corps, patrols, the Navy, The Postal Authority. In chapters 4 to 5, this book gives detailed rules for creating planets and mapping the galaxy. But when starting out, the game master should have a general idea about places and where they are in relation to another. What type of place will the game take place in? The core. The frontier, hostile space, the home base. Sable Phoenix says Babylon 5 is my favorite science fiction on film. Oh, there's going to be a new Babylon 5 animated movie? Interesting. I'm getting a bit warm in here. Chapter 2, Space Travel. Okay. When designing any science fiction universe, one of the most important choices the GM has to make do with is the technology that will be available. This chapter discusses technologies related to space travel, and the next describes advances in other fields. There will not be much discussion of GURPS games mechanics here. The in-game rules for specific technologies will be discussed in other GURPS source books. Instead, this book will focus on the consequences of advanced technology for settings and adventure design, with particular attention to science fiction settings that involve space travel. So, a taxonomy of miracles. The way to classify science fiction worlds is to consider what technological miracles are inherent in the setting or story. In this context, we can think of a miracle as some area of technology that has a significant effect on the environment in which the adventure takes place. The technological mirrors define a significant difference between the science fiction setting and the real world familiar or to the reader or player. It's useful to think about what miracles will be present in a new setting because the GM doesn't have to work nearly as hard on features in the setting that aren't miracles. When there are no miracles, the GM and players can assume that things work in familiar ways. When the GM decides to incorporate a miracle, he has to think about what effects it will have on the setting and his adventure, and he may have to find or develop new rules to cover it. No miracles. It's possible to have a space-oriented campaign with no miracles at all. Human beings have been visiting space for about 40 years. With present-day technology, human space exploration and colonization are very difficult and expensive, but not impossible. First Steps into Space, or the Techno Thriller. So, one miracle, spaceflight. At its most conservative, science fiction involves as few miracles as possible. Stories that involve only one technological miracle have the advantage that most of the setting will be familiar. Naturally, in a space-oriented setting, the first miracle is likely to be in the area of space travel. In space travel, we can define a miracle as a technology that makes space flight easy. There are two great obstacles to humanity's future in space. The first is Earth's powerful gravity well. The second is the speed of light. Any miracle that makes it easy and cheap to launch into Earth's orbit will make the whole solar system easily accessible. A second miracle that somehow sidesteps Einstein could throw open the entire galaxy. Alternative history settings. Emergent superscience. Other one miracle settings are placed in the future. A miraculous breakthrough in physics or engineering might make spaceflight much easier without affecting most other aspects of society. This lets the GM construct a society that resembles our own and then explore it with a breakthrough, then explore the new breakout through's implications. A common variation on this theme involves a starfaring society in which advanced space drives exist, but other technologies have not advanced much beyond the early tech level 8 level. Some of the best military sci-fi often uses this approach. Ordinary infantrymen, armed with simple body armor and automatic rifles, traveling to the battlefield aboard a starship. In space sci-fi, the best recent emergent superscience novel is probably John Varley's Red Thunder. Jerry Porlinel's Mercenary stories are classic examples of using military sci-fi using emergent superscience assumptions. There's no reason why a space-oriented setting must apply a miraculous technology only to the business of spaceflight. As more technologies advance beyond what is currently possible, society and the backdrop for adventure will become increasingly unfamiliar. At its extreme, the addition of miracles gives rise to what in most is nothing gives rise to a setting in which nothing is familiar to the GM or the players. Such settings can be interesting but very difficult to sustain for a lengthy campaign. The next chapter discusses settings in which miracles appear in areas other than space travel. Space flight and story requirements. Ships as major plot elements, ships as trivial plot elements. In some science fiction, spaceships are little more than part of the backdrop. Adventurers simply arrive at the location of the adventure with no time spent establishing how they got there. While it's time for them to move to another world, they do so without needing to spend significant on-camera time on board a starship. Frank Herbert's Dune novels use this kind of structure, although the assumptions of space travel in that universe are critically important to the story. Dan Simmons' Hyperion and its sequels almost entirely ignore spaceships, and in fact, vehicle-less instant teleportation from world to world is an important plot point. Okay. Reaction drives. Let's talk about maneuver drives and how we actually, our rocket equation here. This will probably be our last topic for today, but this is a good one. Babylon 5, A Road Home animated trailer dropped a week ago on Warner Brothers YouTube channel. Oh. No, but it doesn't matter how well written, if the fantasy even fantasy, I find it very unlikely sentient races coexisting. We don't get along even with beings from the same race. Especially if it's like an orc that wants to kill you. Sable Phoenix says, oh, geez, how are they going to handle the rocket equation, the single biggest problem to overcome in getting here to there in space? Let's see. Okay, a maneuver drive is used to propel a ship through... In fact, let me grab something else to drink, and we'll get into this. I'm out of drink. All right. I think we're going to contrast star drives with maneuver drives. A maneuver drive is used to propel a ship through normal space, changing its velocity in space as needed, more or less subject to the known laws of force and motion. Such drives range from realistic propulsion systems like rockets to superscience drives that appear to break some physical laws, but are still limited by the speed of light. A reaction drive is a drive that obeys and takes advantage of Newton's third law of motion. This law implies the momentum of a system is always conserved unless an external force is applied to it. Some reaction drives work by taking advantage of external forces that act on the starship, changing its momentum. See sails or catapults and tethers. However, most reaction drives use the rocket principles of rocketry. In its simplest form, a spaceship using a rocket drive is composed of two portions. The first portion is the payload. This consists of all the parts that are to be conveyed to the ship's destination: crew, passengers, life support equipment, computers, and other instruments, drive machinery, cargo, the whole structure of the ship itself, and so on. The second portion is the reaction mass. The second portion is the reaction mass. Material is carried along only to be thrown away. This rocket engine works by accelerating reaction mass and ejecting it into space, usually as fast-moving gas or plasma. The total momentum of the system remains constant, but since the reaction mass is being accelerated, the law of conservation of momentum means the payload is also accelerated in the opposite direction. The velocity that the reaction mass has when it is ejected is called the exhaust velocity. The force that the rocket engine applies to the payload is called thrust. Since every rocket works by discarding reaction mass, rocket drives are limited by the amount of reaction mass that can be carried, and by the efficiency of the rocket engine. Reaction mass hasn't been ejected yet, has to be accelerated. Reaction mass that hasn't been ejected yet has to be accelerated along with the payload. As a result, it's important to minimize the amount of reaction mass that's needed to complete a given mission. For a fixed amount of reaction mass, the best way to get a more efficient rocket is to increase its exhaust velocity. Of course, a rocket is also limited by the energy it needs to accelerate reaction mass into space. The thrust that engine generates is proportional to the exhaust velocity, but the energy required to operate the engine is proportional to the square of the exhaust velocity. Let's say that again. The thrust the engine generates is proportional to the exhaust velocity, but the energy required to operate the engine is proportional to the square of the exhaust velocity. Oh, okay. So in order to generate the same amount of thrust, a rocket with low exhaust velocity needs more reaction mass. In order to generate the same amount of thrust, a rocket with low exhaust velocity needs more reaction mass. Yeah, makes sense. A rocket with higher exhaust velocity needs less reaction mass, but it may need much more energy in order to operate. The tyranny of the rocket equation. Yeah, Sable thinks, or as in why we are not colonizing the universe, right? With a rocket. In order to make space traversable, you either have to hand wave it or just outright ignore the delta V to fuel equations. That's why even the Expanse has the Epstein drive. Never explain exactly how it works. It's just super efficient because reasons. So, the rocket equation. So what is that? The science of astronautics was pioneered by the Russian mathematician and science fiction writer Konstantin Tsiolkovsky around the beginning of the 20th century. Tsiolkovsky developed a great deal of basic astronautical theory. He was one of the first visionaries to predict artificial satellites, space colonies, and asteroid mining. One of Tsiolkovsky's basic contributions was the rocket equation that has since been named after him. I've never heard this name before, actually. The Tsiolkovsky's equation is delta V equals E times the natural logarithm of T divided by P. So here, E is the effective exhaust velocity of the rocket engine, a quantity also called the specific impulse. T is the total mass of the rocket-driven spaceship, including both payload and its initial reaction mass, and P is the mass of the payload alone. So here, E right up here, the effective exhaust velocity of the rocket engine. T right here, so T is the total mass of the rocket-driven spaceship, including both payload and initial reaction mass, and P is the mass of the payload alone. The quantity that's giving you, this delta V, is called delta V. Delta V is the amount of velocity change the ship can carry out with its available reaction mass. Every deep space maneuver requires the ship spend some of its delta V budget, escaping from orbit around a homeworld, changing course in deep space, entering the orbit of a destination world, changing the parameters of an existing orbit, and so on. Maneuvers that are carried out against gravity, such as a planetary launch or landing, can be measured in terms of delta V, or can also be measured in terms of delta V. Low tech level rocket drives are usually very limited in the amount of delta V that's available to them. Mission planners spend a lot of time searching for trajectories that can get a ship to its destination with the use of minimal delta V. It's sometimes possible for a ship to change course without spending delta V. For example, a ship can fly by a world using its gravity to accelerate and change heading. By manipulating the Tsiolkovsky equation, it's possible to derive a formula describing how much of a ship's initial mass needs to be taken up by reaction mass. To summarize, if the required delta V is much smaller than the exhaust velocity, every little reaction mass will be needed. Once the required delta V rises above the exhaust velocity, reaction mass soon dominates the ship's size. To summarize, if the required delta V is much smaller than the exhaust velocity, very little reaction mass will be needed. But once the required delta V rises above the exhaust velocity, reaction mass soon dominates the ship's size. Sable Phoenix says the game Children of a Dead Earth is a space combat simulator that only uses known physics and known achievable technology, even if we can't reliably make it yet. You basically have to plan your orbital path ahead of time and swing past the enemy at high speed. You only get one pass to throw some lasers or railgun slugs at them. Interesting. Jonathan Reese says, I've thought about using the board game Rocket Flight to handle a sci-fi RPG in the solar system using realistic Delta V design, travel time, etc. Rocket Flight board game? That's another one to look up. That sounds cool. I found it on Board Game Geek. Oh, this is an old school game. Each player starts out as a spacefaring company in the year 2020 trying to make a profit in trade and technological development. The game design uses a theories of Lagrange points, specific impulse, and remote power sources. Oh, it says, as of 2003, out of print. As of 2010, completely redesigned as High Frontier. That's interesting if you have a way to gamify this outside. Okay, High Frontier, yeah. The tyranny of the rocket equation means that diminishing returns will eventually dictate the amount of reaction mass needed to get to a certain distance is too heavy to propel itself there. Yes. The square cube law sucks. Another game that handles space combat realistically is Attack Vector Tactical. Origins Award winner, endorsed for scientific accuracy by Scientific American, the only realistic space combat game playable on the tabletop. Oh, I'm going to have to check that one out too. That does sound pretty cool. I wonder, when was this made? There was a game that I played about space combat only once that was about ships, you know, beating each other up with different types of weapons and things like that. And it was really cool and it was really detailed, but I only ever played it once and I have no idea what the name was. And I don't know enough detail to say, although I do remember, the only thing I really remember about it is that each one of your ships had a page, like a piece of paper that was about it, and you would fill in different parts of your starship that were hit and damaged. It could be this. I don't know. We might have to look at this attack vector one morning. Zero the Blade says, I have a friend who might like this because this is all the fields he's studying. Sable Phoenix, I've wanted to play attack vector but not found anyone who owns the game. We'll have to take a look at this. Okay, so known rocket types. The following rocket types are currently feasible using known engineering technologies. A chemical rocket. A chemical rocket is the first reaction drive likely to be used by any spacefaring civilization. Chemical rockets get their energy by burning flammable reaction mass or fuel, expelling the resulting hot gas from the back of the rocket chamber. Most chemical rockets will use liquid fuels, such as liquid hydrogen or a slurry of powdered metals like aluminum. Solid rocket fuels are possible but hard to shut down and control once ignited. A chemical rocket that operates in space must also be provided with some type of oxidizer to support combustion. The most likely oxidizer is liquid oxygen, which can be carried on board tanks used as part of the reaction mass. Chemical rockets can deliver a lot of thrust very quickly and very useful for launching from planetary surfaces or maneuvering in orbit. On the other hand, they have a relatively low exhaust velocity, and so they use tremendous quantities of fuel and oxidizer. An interplanetary journey using chemical rocket normally involves a short burn at the beginning of the trip, followed by months or years of coasting with the delivery of only a small payload at the end. Ion drive. An ion drive converts reaction mass into ions, charged atoms and molecules, and then uses electrical power to accelerate the ions into a fast exhaust stream. The most likely substances for reaction mass include noble gases argon or xenon, or the poisonous metal cadmium. An ion drive provides very low thrust and is useless for taking off from a planet. On the other hand, its exhaust velocity is high. Ion drives are therefore fuel efficient and can be used for long periods of constant acceleration. This makes them good candidates for interplanetary travel, taking months rather than years to cross interplanetary distances. An ion drive will need a continuous power supply, usually a bank of solar cells or an onboard nuclear reactor. Fission rocket. A fission rocket uses a built-in fission or radiothermal reactor to heat reaction mass and then expels the hot gases as a high-energy exhaust. Fission rockets are compromised between chemical rockets and ion drives. They can provide more thrust than an ion drive, but have lower exhaust velocity and so are less fuel efficient. They also are useful because they provide onboard power and motive thrust. They may also be suitable for interplanetary warships or courier craft. Speculative. I want to look at the sample delta V requirements, but we also have speculative rocket types, nuclear pulse drive. This drive works by setting off nuclear explosions behind the ship. The energy of each nuclear explosion produces a vast exhaust of hot plasma. A large-scale version, such as the Orion drive, uses full-size nuclear bombs, requiring a huge shock-absorbing pusher plate behind the vessel. More sophisticated versions create micro-explosions, triggering small fusion fuel pellets with a ring of powerful lasers or ion beams. Another approach triggers fissionable pellets using anti-proton beams. This vision could use little antimatter that could be produced uses so little antimatter that could be produced using present-day technology. Another nuclear pulse drive can provide a lot of thrust. A nuclear pulse drive can provide a lot of thrust and also has a high exhaust velocity and fuel efficiency. It might be the best candidate for a fast interplanetary drive. Although building such a drive is currently out of reach, the main obstacle in the way is political rather than technological. Many people object to a drive that involves setting off nuclear explosions. Fusion rocket. As with a fusion rocket involves heating reaction mass with a propelled nuclear reaction and then expelling it as hot exhaust. A fusion rocket might offer performance nearly as good as a nuclear-powered drive without the expense of specialized fuel pellets or the danger of carrying around hundreds of atomic bombs. Antimatter thermal rocket. This drive uses a small quantity of antimatter to heat up a much larger amount of conventional reaction mass, creating plasma to be ejected for thrust. It can provide high thrust and is much more efficient than fusion drives. It requires the technology to produce, distribute, and contain useful quantities of antimatter. Antimatter pion drive? This drive is a pure antimatter rocket. It mixes matter and antimatter equally, very small quantities, producing an exhaust composed of very fast subatomic particles. The rocket doesn't provide much thrust, but its high exhaust velocity makes it extremely fuel efficient. It's among the most realistic candidates for STL stellar travel. A total conversion drive. This theoretical drive converts reaction mass directly into energy, perhaps in the form of photons or gravity waves. There is no known way to produce this conversion, but the concept is barely hard sci-fi. It doesn't violate the laws of conservation of energy or momentum, and it also requires the ship to refuel once in a while. So, sample delta V requirements. Oh, please do click the like button, everybody. Sable Phoenix says, I love the book Ignition about the early days of rocketry and what kinds of rockets, fuels and oxidizers they tried. It's how I learned about the utterly terrifying chlorine trifluoride. I don't know anything about that. That's another thing to look up. Here, I'm going to put that. I got tons of stuff to look up today. So, sample delta V requirements. Every low tech level space mission is planned around its delta V budget. A high delta V requirement means the spacecraft will need more reaction mass, possibly crowding out needed payload. Lower delta V requirements make a mission cheaper and more feasible, or permit more payload mass to be delivered. Here are some typical Delta V requirements for early space missions. All of the figures assume high thrust chemical rockets. Low thrust engineering, such as ion drives, will need more Delta V due to the drag of gravity, usually 2 to 3 times as much. So Earth launch. To reach low Earth orbit requires about 5.9 miles per second of Delta V. To reach low Earth orbit requires about 5.9 miles per second of Delta V. A low thrust engine will not be able to perform this mission at all. Earth orbital maneuvers. To move from a low Earth orbit to a geosynchronous orbit requires 2 maneuvers, with a total Delta V requirement of about 2.5 miles per second. To move from low Earth orbit to an escape trajectory usually requires less Delta V. To move from a low Earth orbit to an escape trajectory requires less Delta V, about 2 miles per second in all, assuming the escape burn is performed at perigee, the point at the orbit closest to Earth where the spacecraft is already moving fastest. That's using the Earth to the Earth's gravity, right, to change your velocity instead of your own Delta V. Interplanetary travel. To move from a low Earth orbit to a low orbit around other bodies takes varying amounts of Delta V. A journey to low lunar orbit would take about 2.4 miles per second. Reaching some near-Earth asteroids would require about the same amount of Delta V as a lunar expedition. A journey to low Martian orbit would take about 3.5 miles per second. Reaching solar escape velocity from low Earth orbit requires about 5.4 miles per second. Solar escape velocity from low Earth orbit requires 5.4 miles per second. This is the upper bound on the Delta V needed for most interplanetary journeys, escaping the gravity of the sun. All right. Well, I think that is where we are going to put a pin in it for today. Starfleet Battles has a sheet to track weapons and damage taken. It's based on Star Trek. Might have to check that one out too. All right. Well, so that started our dive into GURPS space. We didn't really take a look at the contents. So we went through space campaign types, basically getting this started. And then we started taking a look at space travel, taking a look at reaction drives. So we've also got, so this is in the category of maneuver drives. So we've got sails, catapults, and tethers, reactionless drives, relativity effects, and generation ships coming. Then we take a look at star drives, which hyperdrives, jump drives, warp drives, designing a star drive, navigation errors, shipboard systems, technology, basic world building, advanced world building, alien life and alien minds. So we'll continue with this tomorrow. All right. Always a fun listen and discussion. This was a really great discussion. This was a great topic. So there's probably a lot more in this book to conversation material in here. All right. I'm not sure if we're doing. I guess let's make this call. I have got to, since I'm playing the Kings of War game tomorrow, I do need to finish my Kings of War guys, but I got tons of other stuff I got to do. So I might get, yeah, I know. Lynn says, you will find that GURPS space gets very crunchy with the numbers once you get into world building. Yes. We started off not very crunchy with discussions of what sci-fi is, but that was a great way to ease into the discussion. So I might do a members only stream tonight because I need to finish basing more guys and get these things done by tomorrow. But that means if I do that, that'll be at 7 or 7:30 tonight. So that gives me basically 8 hours. I need to use this 8 hours extremely productively and get a whole bunch written. I've got a meeting on Saturday. I've got an important meeting on Saturday about some of the projects that we're trying to get off the ground here. So, all right, I got to get ready for that too. So thank you, everybody, for hanging out with me this morning. I have enjoyed it. It was a fantastic conversation, and we will continue it tomorrow. I will see you tonight. Yeah, let's go into it because I've got to base these guys. So I'll be working on basing these guys. We'll do a members only stream tonight. We didn't get to talk about 10 candles. And James, I remember you said you want to talk about 10 candles. We talked about other things, which is fine. We can talk about 10 candles role playing tonight, or we can talk about whatever else that you want to talk about. We can talk about the Titanic submarine situation or the UFO situation, which are both suitable for having talked about GURPS space today. All right, later, everybody. Be productive, be creative, and grind.